Okay, so like I said, before we begin getting into the bulk of the content for this semester, I really need to bring us all up to speed and get us all on the same page. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this kind of generic concept of what art history is. Like, what is it? What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? And through which lenses are we going to be viewing this? And then we also need to know the right type of vocabulary, this thing called form and style. Right, so essentially, kind of let me break some things down for you. Art history, it's the study of art objects, but they are very specifically, it's not just the study of art. It is not just looking at art from history. It is looking at any artifact that has been made by humans, right, that have some sort of historical, social, or cultural context. Now, there are so many different things that could, that can kind of envelop. But let's look at a few kind of points. We'll be looking at specifically like the artists. Everybody knows or is extremely familiar, I think, with the Mona Lisa here from Leonardo da Vinci. So looking at the artist, right? Maybe who created it, or who is the architect or the designer or the craftsperson? Who is this person, and what kind of position did they hold in society? Who were they? What did they do? How else did they contribute? So on and so forth. So we'll look at background and kind of contextual information about the artist. We could be looking at artworks from the patron's point of view, and the patron is a person or an entity, and we're going to see this a lot of the times. It's going to be the church, who specifically commissions works of art, or commissions or hires artists to do work specifically for the church. So we will see we have an overabundance of non-secular work that we'll be looking at, partly because the church is the wealthiest patron at this point in time. As we get into the class, the church's motivation for hiring all of these artists to produce work is to really to heal this rift, or something that happened in 1376, like the Great Schism, when the church split. And there is a very kind of concerned effort to bring people back into the folds of the Catholic Church, or to the Catholic Orthodoxy, but it was decided that the best way to do that was through visual mediums, right? Through producing art for people to consume. Another lens that we'll be looking at this art history thing is through culture, epistemologies, right? Cultural context, the origin stories, birthrights, star stories, mythologies. These are the context, the cultural contexts are really the set of conditions in which that particular piece or pieces or series were created. Why? For who? What purpose? Was it meant to persuade? Was it meant for propaganda? Right? All of those things will be discussed, but they cannot be taken in isolation, right? You can't take these things out of context. And then another final lens, and by all means, these are not like the only four, but definitely from a historical context, the events affecting the creation or the production or even the perception, right? And then potentially maybe even the continued existence of that artwork. Does the Mona Lisa today in 2026 mean the same thing that it did when it was displayed in 1505? And certainly and as we will get into this, we will see that the Mona Lisa, even though now it is one of the most iconic works of art through the history of mankind, it really didn't happen. It really wasn't that big of a deal. Nobody cared. It was actually turned around backwards on this turned and leaned up against the wall in Napoleon's bathroom, of all places, before it was stolen in 1911 and then returned to the Louvre, and only at that point did the Mona Lisa then become the Mona Lisa. Up until then, from its creation from 1505 until 1911, nobody gave two shits about the Mona Lisa. It wasn't that good of an artwork, and it still isn't. So that is kind of some of the lenses in which we will be looking at art right through. Again, art history, it's that the physical evidence. We'll be taking a look at all of these different things, the materials. We're going to be talking about this concept of truth to the materials ad nauseum. So the age in which the piece was created, right? Maybe the documentary evidence. So the church records or the bills of sales or even the documentary photography aspects of taking this, because there's, in some cases, we'll look at pictures like John Gast's and imagery, and those no longer exist. They deteriorated and they got burned in a fire, so they are no longer in existence. And the only image, the only document that we have of them is a photograph, right? So there's internal evidences like fashions and architecture, or an image of a recognizable person within a particular artwork. Maybe it's not about the specific artwork itself. Maybe it's the patron who is having a portrait painted. Or maybe if we look at people like Velázquez, quiet, Maple, I'm recording. We will see that like they paint themselves into the painting, or people like Jan van Eyck often do this, right? So maybe there's a little bit of ego involved in art, maybe a little bit more than just a little bit. And then stylistic evidence, the distinctive manners or art styles of that particular era. We're going to see transitions, and we see these genres: mannerism, right? Impressionism, post-impressionism. We can, once you get through this course, you'll be able to look at a particular piece of artwork and have a ballpark range of where that painting was maybe made. By whom, what genre, and eras as well. So, kind of cool. Okay, so, and again, why I'm doing this beforehand, before we just jump into these things, we need to have a vocabulary. We need to talk about this thing called form and style. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to be able to discuss it, and we need to be able to synthesize what we're learning into information that we can easily relay to other people. So I want you to think about it this way. We have a couple different, we have this thing called the elements of art, and then we have this thing called the principles of art. And all often, they do blend really well together, but they are two different and distinct kind of sets of rules. But what I would like to look at is, like in English, the elements of art, the elements make up, they're all the parts, okay? That's the basic vocabulary of art, and not limited to, but including line, shape, form, mass, color, texture, space, time, maybe motion, value, right? These are all the basic vocabulary. These are the elements. These are the things. The principles, rules, right, are how the elements of the art is organized. So if Maple, I'm not editing this, by the way. Come here. She's just a puppy. There. Are you happy now? Okay, sorry. So the elements are all of the parts and pieces, right? And the principles are how these things are organized. So if we looked at it from like an English, or like writing a sentence, we can write all of the words we want in a sentence. Right? Those are the elements of the sentence. But until those elements are placed in the proper order, we don't know what they're saying, right? That's grammar. So the grammar of art is the contrast, the balance, unity, variety, rhythm, emphasis, pattern, proportion, scale, all of these different concepts that we'll be looking at and discussing. So why this is important, and I'm going to show you some examples of all of these. Why are these so important? So as I'm going through and discussing these things, talking about line and how it leads the eye through, or how maybe in Spanish mannerism, when we start looking at these elongated, emaciated forms that are really talking about the emphasis of the line or the way that the body is drawn to enhance the viewer's feeling of suffering. All of these things. Maybe this we're going to look at a particular stylistic concern in art called tenebrism. And tenebrism is all about contrast. It is all about making sure that the emphasis of the piece is very specifically highlighted and everything else isn't, right? So that's emphasis, that's contrast, but that's also, we're going to be looking at volume and space, okay? This is all new to us, and that's fine if this seems a bit murky, but just kind of keep this in mind, that the elements are the words and the principles are the grammar, okay? So in order to make a proper sentence make sense, we have to have the words in the right order. So as long as we're keeping that in the back of our noodle, we should be good. So let's take a look at some of these to help kind of solidify some of these in our brain, huh? So we have several different types of line. I'm going to have to move my me around here. We have several different types of line. The three most common that we will talk about in kind of all of our classes, or all of my classes, we have these things called straight lines. We have things called curvilinear lines. And we have these things called implied lines. And then there are several other styles and types of line within those. One is a contour line. And here are two examples, one on the left from Picasso and the other one from Henri Matisse. Contour lines are kind of the outer edge profile, quick sketches, renderings. It's the profile, maybe the outer edge of an object, but it's not necessarily a complete outline. It's not a complete form. They suggest volume. They suggest space. And they kind of give us some clues as to what we're looking at, but our brain is expected to fill in the gaps a lot. They're kind of just giving us some clues or insights into maybe the textures, right? The depth, the space, and all of these things that we're looking at. So, quick rendering. Contour lines can be quick, jagged, right? They can be long and continuous. Okay, they can be wide and fat, brushed across, or they can be very thin, faint, right? We're going to look at people like maybe Alberto Giacometti, where he's using what is called a gesture drawing, or gesture lines, right, to show action and anxiety. Can't get my thing to move. There we go. Okay, so here's line is pretty simple, straight line. We'll look at them, but here's a really interesting. I didn't think that this one. Oh, I guess it is the next slide. I told you I'm not going to edit this, and I'm doing this live and on the fly. Okay, so Jean-Antoine Watteau is the artist that we're looking at here. The pilgrimage. Okay, implied line. Has anybody spotted it yet? You're like, well, Seth, I don't see any lines. Maybe I see lines here, right? I see a line there. Yeah, well, those are lines. You are correct. But that's not what I'm talking about. An implied line is an implication of a line, right? The implied line is how your eyes can enter and exit a particular piece of artwork. So here, in this particular case, let me show you where the implication of a line actually sets. Okay? Yes, I probably could have added and included this, but essentially it is dark here in this corner. You have light coming here. You have this tree trunk, and your eye kind of follows down and goes up, follows these people through, and it goes right up to that mast, and it comes right back down, and it kind of goes right back through. So we have this kind of circular pattern, right, that our eyes traverse. That's an implied line. Here's also some implied lines. Now, these are directional lines or compositional lines, sometimes they'll be called. Directional lines help us see what direction the motion is going, right? Even though, like, these two particular people are facing the opposite direction, right? And we have these lines here. The force, the directional force, is going the opposite way, right? Because they're rowing. So they're going in a different direction, but we see all of these types of here lines, right? The horizon lines. We see the line of the trees, the lines of the clouds. We even see curvilinear lines here in their backs and their arms. So, I mean, we have a lot of these converging lines and directional lines, okay? So to help break down compositions, it is quite easy to break things down. I always tell them in my studio art courses, line, shape, and color, right? Formalism, the basic forms that we all kind of can see. And if we broke this down, essentially, and deconstructed this whole image where it wasn't just the lines, if it was just the lines, excuse me, not the people or any of the trees or the water, if it was just the lines, this would just be a really nice geometric pattern, okay? Trying to get me out of the way as much as possible. This thing really is quite annoying sometimes. So lines communicate as well. All of these things are forms of communication. Art, visual communication, right, is just a nonverbal form of communicating ideas. So we'll see oftentimes vertical lines, right? They communicate strength, their stability, authority, right? Especially on the weight. It also has distance. But, you know, something similar or simple to this, right? These pediments and columns, government buildings, libraries, strength, stability, authority. These are typically, in your mind, you will see them as what? Marble, stone, right? Those things are permanent. Horizontal lines can communicate calmness. They can communicate kind of this pacificity, peace, calm, serene, right? In this example, having a calm, flat ocean. It would be drastically different, right, if it was wavy or very angry, right, and aggressive. That would be a different type of a line. And then diagonals can communicate movement, action, and drama, right? Leaning forward, tilting back. We're going to see some artwork where some diagonal lines are creating very dramatic settings. Horizontal, and by all means, do not assume that these are hard and fast rules. There are some things, the idea of like a horizontal line, yes, it can be communicated as calmness or passiveness, but it can also be extremely like bone-chilling and cold, talking about death, right? This hard line between living and dying, or maybe life after life, good, bad, right? This ubiquity of good and evil. So lines can communicate depending on the context, and remember that line is just an element, right? So it's just a word until it is put into a grammatical setting, right? A principle, a rule, the sentence, and until those are in the proper order, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It only has meaning based on everything else that is happening around it, the context in which the painting is produced or the artwork is produced. Lines can regulate control. I think lines are line is probably the most important thing, but well, they all are. It's really hard to say. I can't, but we can have these things called a closed design, but then we also have open designs, right? Closed designs are very controlling. They're closed. They are something like this, Barbara Hepworth's drawings, where these contours are on the outside and all of the action is contained within, right? It doesn't escape. It doesn't go out anywhere. But yet, if we look at something like Piet Mondrian or Vasily Kandinsky. Those are very open designs where the designs go outside of the page. This also here by Masson could be an open design because there are no defined borders or edges. The lines just kind of trail off and end, right? So we can look at things, lines that can express freedoms or passions, anxieties, fears, right? There are so many ways that lines can affect and influence the way a viewer looks and views at a piece of art and understands a piece of art. We're going to have some terminologies that we will look at this semester that we often use wrong in our everyday vernacular. But let me put the record straight. We're going to be looking at two very specific forms of line. We have a shape and a form. A shape, there are only, right, in formalism, line, shape, and color. And a line and a shape, right, lines make up shapes. So on the left here, a circle is a shape. A square is a shape. A triangle is a shape. The only way to make a shape into a form is by adding dimension, by adding depth. And the only way that we can do that is by adding shadows or value, okay? And once we start adding value or a depth to a shape, then we get a form, because then a circle turns into a spherical form, right? A square is rectilinear or a cube, right? You have triangles that could turn into a cone or this pyramidal form, or of course the circle could be cylindrical. Okay, so these are great examples of the differences between forms and shapes. Okay, so try to use those terms correctly. Another series of words that we often use incorrectly when we get to color, tint, tones, and shades, but we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to look at a lot of things in the Renaissance, in particular this Italian term that's going to come up again and again and again. The proper pronunciation is chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is Italian for light to dark, from light to dark, right? That spectrum, that value range, okay, where light to dark is applying this kind of this proper shading to get the human form. And it seems weird to look at these types of drawings now, but this wasn't the case. We hadn't figured out how to make a shape into a form yet, pre-Renaissance. They hadn't added shadows or shading. Value wasn't a concept yet. So these are revolutionary techniques, adding three-dimensional depth here of where the thigh rounds, and you can see that the underscore of the shadow start. Pre-Renaissance, right, in the Byzantine time frame, never see shadows. That wasn't a thing. So when these particular types of artwork hit the scene in the early Renaissance or in that late Gothic period, right, people's minds exploded and the world literally changed overnight. So we do have two types of shapes and forms that we can look at. We have organic and geometric, or organic and non-organic, or geometric and non-geometric, but essentially these are the things. Organic forms, these are the irregular and the unpredictable, right? Things that are living are organic, like to the left. Of course, geometric then are your regular forms, readily expressible in words or mathematics, of course, right? Cubes, spheres, cylinders, cones, pyramids, so on and so forth. To the left, David Smith's sculpture, very much geometric forms. However, one could say that although within this geometric sculpture, it is an organically formed work, because this isn't a very irregular shape. Right? This is not something found in nature. We'll get into it. Don't worry. I'm just giving you some like really basic overviews of what we're looking at. We might look at things. Move me out of the way. All right. We might look at things that I will call a relief painting or painting. Excuse me. Relief sculptures. And we can look at a few different types. We have a high relief and a bas relief. That bas, B-A-S, is pronounced bas. A high relief is this carved panel where the figures project with a great deal of depth from the background. Okay? For example, this is a high relief. Okay? But a bas relief is sculpted with very little depth, something to like here, where the form itself is not that far separated from the background. Now, the caveat and the thing is to remember, this is not that the picture of the Romans here are not that far out of the background, maybe an inch, right? Maybe, but that's still a considerable amount of depth, considering that you have these. Actually, that's funny. I've been teaching this class for a long time, and I just noticed that he sort of looks like Voldemort with no nose. It's funny. Anyways, so Voldemort here, you can see his head almost 3/4 way around, right? Same thing with this woman here, and certainly the child, even though that is just a little bit off of the background, that is still considered a high relief. Okay, and just remember, bas relief is low. Okay, low relief. Textures. We can look at textures. Those are not the implied lines, are not the only implications of things that we have. We can look at this from a textural standpoint. We know that the skin is smooth and soft, right? We know what hair feels like. So the way that the marble is made to feel, made to look smooth and feel soft and supple, right? That's a texture. We also have, I'm going to double this slide with something that's called in the round. Anything that you can walk around in a 360, right? That's called in the round. The David, or any other sculpture, really, would be able to be used in this kind of classification. But I want to say that the next slide, cart before the horse. This is me knowing my PowerPoints really, really well. So texture is this tactile sensation when we are physically encountered in a three-dimensional form. So, but again, we know what skin feels like, right? Actual texture to implied texture. Here's an implied texture. Now, why is this an implied? This is not human skin. We know that this is marble. We know that that's not soft. If you touch it, it's cold. It's hard. It's not the point. The point is it mimics life, right? There's truth to the materials. But we have this term that we'll look at called trompe l'oeil, right? To fool the eye. It is made so realistically that we just know that it's soft, supple skin. Now here we know that this is a pipe. Ce n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. Right? This is Rene Magritte, The Treachery of Images from 1929 or so. But the way that the highlights are, right, the way that the value and the shading is, we can see that it's very smooth, polished wood, and we can feel it. So it's very much implied, right, by the way that it's depicted within the image. Here's that concept of value that we were talking about. Value, like this Italian term, chiaroscuro, value is this reference to the range of lightness to darkness, from whitest whites to the darkest darks, which also, if I'm prepared, hold on, so go contrast next. Damn, space. Where's contrast? Damn. All right, well, okay, whatever. Contrast and value are very interrelated. So values, an artist's use of value can produce a sense of solidarity or influence the mood if it's really, really dark or really, really white. So a contrast, let me just tell you what that is then real quick. So if you have the whitest whites and the darkest darks, going from white to black, right? Contrast is how far separated those two colors are. So if you have this, right, from white to black, that's a high contrast. But now if you're looking at colors from here to here and only looking at those three, that is called low contrast, right? Or sometimes we will call this neutral, right? Because there is not the separation between the lightest light and the darkest dark, since that threshold isn't that much, right? This is where we get those kind of middle tones that out of. Okay, space, compositional space, negative space, positive space. We're going to be looking at all of this kind of stuff, but just know that there's a lot to unpack when it comes to space. Okay, visual depth as well is something that we can use them not necessarily interchangeably, but we can talk about them within the same kind of meaning, but knowing that they are very different. Okay, but those are some of the correct words. Atmospheric perspective is another one that we're going to look at. But space talks about, it can give us senses of depth. It can give us a sense of loneliness or forlorning. It can give us a sense of claustrophobia. It can give us anxiety. It can induce all of these feelings all at once by overlapping, by size, by position, alternating values, alternating textures, changing the brightnesses of colors, maybe not just black and white. So all of these things are kind of involved in this concept of space or compositional space. And I think this will become, all of these concepts, one, I will say, will become self-evident. And two, it will be muscle memory. It will be very easy and obvious to start pointing these things out after we start looking at examples in depth. And you'll say, oh, that's this. And let me tell you, as another point, you'll never have any of these in isolation. None of these will ever happen in isolation, not just space. I'm talking about all of the elements and principles. You will never have just color or just line or just texture, just shape, just, value. All of these things are going on at all times, okay? Another compositional space. This is what I was telling you about, maybe flat horizon lines, or these flat lines can really show a sense of heaviness, right? In this particular line, where these lines go all the way across, and yes, we do have other types of directional lines here, but the main line is cutting right in half, where there is a definitive light, dark. And in this point, the death of Marat, David is showing the imposing heaviness of death, of this murder, of a tragic scene. So this huge imposing blackness is weighing down on somebody that doesn't look like they were murdered. It looks as if, other than the blood, right, and maybe in the heart or in the chest area, it's kind of sullen and serene, just taking a bath. But anyways, we'll get into this. Positive, negative space. Positive space is, generally speaking, basically anything that's stuff, anywhere that stuff is positive space. Typically, but not always, where there isn't stuff, negative space, right? Okay. Atmospheric perspective. So atmospheric perspective, and we're going to see a lot of this when we get into Romanticism, the Hudson River School. We're going to see this thing because, again, these are all brand new concepts, people. We might look at this and go, oh, yeah, no big deal. That's what it always is, right? But in 1849, explosion of new techniques that mimic realism, right? Why we have this realistic movement. So atmospheric perspective, very specifically, is it's this in the background, right? Where as you see in distance, atmosphere, air, dust particles, pollution, so on and so forth. All of the stuff is in between me and the thing that I'm seeing way over there in the end, or at the other side of the field or whatever, on the other side of the valley, these other mountains. But because of that, because of the atmosphere between it, everything is kind of middle grade out. Everything, you can see a value change, and it becomes much more transparent in the background, right? Because you have all of this stuff that's obscuring your actual view. So, and if this is kind of a new concept, go outside. Maybe not now because it's cold, but on a clear day, go out somewhere where you can see far, far away, and you will see this in real life, where if it's kind of foggy out, you can only see a little bit of a distance, right? So that's what atmospheric perspective is. We'll be taking a look at a lot of that. I will leave these here, for you all to look at. We will look at perspectives, linear perspectives, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 7 point, so on and so forth, perspectives. From a vanishing point, horizon lines, and these things that we will call object lines, or technically they're called orthogonal lines. And all orthogonals go back and meet at one vanishing point or two vanishing points. And this is how we can look at 1, 2, or 3 point perspective. We'll get into all of that as well. But here's a great kind of understanding. Of course, these lines aren't here, but if we drew all of the lines that converge, right, where they all meet is your vanishing point, okay? And then here's your horizon line. So it just gives you a perspective. So sometimes you can then see from the artist's point of view, was the artist sitting when they're painting their portrait? Were they standing? Did they change? That's something that we'll look at when we start looking at Cubism, and some of the things that Pablo Picasso and George Braque are doing, where they're painting, they're sitting down, and all of a sudden they're painting the same object, but they're standing up. So all of a sudden now you have two perspectives of the same object, and maybe they changed canvas positions all the time, changed canvas positions. So now they're looking at it from like 6 steps this way. So now they're looking at it from a completely different perspective and point of view. And to throw like one more confusing thing, Picasso and Braque were studio mates, meaning that they shared a studio, and they would often paint the same subjects. More often than not, they would trade canvases. Braque would paint on Picasso's canvas, and Picasso would paint on Braque's canvas. Sometimes they would even sign each other's names. And there are some paintings that have Picasso's signature that are not Picasso's, and vice versa. Braque often gets kind of shoved to the side and has Picasso being attributed to his paintings when it was very much George Braque. So interesting, fun things. But we'll look at all of that kind of stuff. Foreshortening, we're not going to get too much into comic books, but this is the best example that I can, there are great examples of foreshortening. But let me tell you, even in all of the height of the Renaissance and in all of this thing, foreshortening is not something that is perfected until 19th, 20th century. It is just a really difficult concept to grasp, and I will tell you, the majority of people are not good at it. They cannot successfully do it. Even some of the most famous painters that we are going to be studying in this class suck at foreshortening. Okay? The most successful applications of this particular technique is in graphic novels and comic books, so this is why I'm showing this to you. And the best example of foreshortening, what I can say is, just like this here, how Superman's hand is up front, right? And getting this perspective correct, making it look proportional, but it's this. Making the arm the correct size and the shading, the shadows, all in the correct ways, so you can see that this comes all the way back up to my shoulder, and it looks natural. Okay, there are going to be some paintings that we look at when foreshortening is just starting to become a thing, where it looks as if we could take, and there's a particular picture of Jesus, that if we could take Jesus out of the painting and stand him up, he'd have a normal-sized head, a normal-sized torso, and then little tiny legs and huge feet. And as a matter of fact, his in the second version of the painting, and I'm not going to tell you all of it, but I will tell you just to overcompensate for the fact that he made Jesus' feet super, super tiny. So if we would have taken that version out, again, normal size head of Jesus, a normal size torso, arms, legs, super tiny legs, and tiny, tiny feet. Really, really funny to me. We'll have a class chuckle when we get to that chapter. So, color, light. Man, I can't. I could teach an entire class, and in fact, they do have entire classes and entire degrees based off of just color theory. Joseph Albers and Piet Mondrian are the two godfathers of color theory. So we will look at this ad nauseum. We will look at how color can influence, but just know that color plays such an important role in how we view things. Economically, monetarily, right? It is interesting how we take color for granted. We look at paintings that are red and we're like, oh yeah, it's just red paint. You can go to Hobby Lobby and buy oodles of red paint as much as you want. Pre-Renaissance, red, you couldn't get red. You could have a red dye based, or that was made out of plants, berries and fruits, but since they were an organic material, they would change and they would not stay true red. And it wasn't until the Spanish invasion of this continent and the Spanish taking over Mexico for the cochineal bug, cochineal fly, we'll look at those, we didn't have red. That trade, that very specific pigment trade in the early trades and the early Spanish invasion is what spurned the Renaissance. Because at that point in time, there was very little red in any of the paintings. And what paintings did have red, again, small quantities because it was so expensive. But then when it became a commodity that was more easily accessible, you start seeing it everywhere. So we'll look at kind of this. This is that point of like economics and context, right? The social contexts of artwork. So there are different types. We'll get into all of this. Primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Secondary colors, and primary colors cannot be created by mixing any other colors together, right? We have secondary colors, which are mixing two primaries. So again, if you get red and blue, you will get violet. It is not purple. Purple is an anglicized word of the ancient Greek purpura. Purpura is actually a little sea snail that when the snail would die, they take the shell and grind it up. And get a specific pigment, and they called it purpura because that's what it was, and purpura got changed and anglicized into purple, as we know today. But the actual color or the actual hue name is violet. So the light spectrum frequency is violet. All right. So value, again, we already know what value is, this lightness to darkness. The hue, generally classified as the specific color itself. So if I said this green hue, that just means I'm talking about a green color or the specific color. So hue is called is the color's name itself. Okay. And then we'll look at a couple. I think this is one of the last slides. We'll look at a couple different types of stylistic concerns. We have something that's representational versus something that is abstract. So again, looking at different artists, something to the left by Picasso that is extremely representational, something that represents real life as if it were a photograph or if it were real. Okay, this is the way traditionally painting was always done, always, 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 and it wasn't. It certainly wasn't in what we see on the right side in this abstracted form. Also Picasso, but where we start breaking things down, and this is when we start getting into this genre called Cubism, where we start breaking things down into its basic shapes, lines, shapes, and colors. Okay, Cubist art, non-representational art, will walk itself right into minimalism and formalism. So these are all stepping stones. Okay. And then we have something that's completely different, abstract expressionism, or non-representational or non-objective. These are examples of like Jackson Pollock, right? One of the foremost American painters that we have, and my youngest son's namesake. Something like this, which is number 1A. He has some funny names for his things. This doesn't represent anything in nature. This is not an abstracted form. This is not an abstracted shape. These are emotional, psychological, spiritual concepts, right? Things that are not tangible. And when we get into this, we will talk about Pollock and how like abstract expressionism was looking at like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell's kind of mythological archetypes, right? And these primeval beings. And really how Pollock is trying to cure himself of alcoholism, right, through his work. All right, that is the end of the slideshow on kind of basic terminologies, basic structures, basic understandings, basic lenses of how we're going to be viewing, and some of the words that I'm going to be talking about when we look at the artwork starting next week. So, all right, thank you. If you do have any questions on anything that I went over, the PowerPoint is in Canvas module. This is able to be downloaded. Ask questions or shoot me an email, right? I'll be glad to go over anything with you again. So, all right, that's it.